So first off, we wanted to welcome you guys to our podcast titled By Identity. I'm Kandi.
And I'm Tahrea.
And we thought to start off the series with explaining our thoughts in context to the title, as well as how it's going to relate to all of the subsequent topics. So enjoy the show.
The word by is a homophone, which describes words that have the same pronunciation but different meanings, origins, or spellings. When we say by, there's 4 different interpretations of how we are applying the word in terms of identity, starting with the first definition of by, which means two.
And what do you think of when you think of the word two?
When I think of that, I just think of a pair, or just two things that complement one another, like peanut butter and jelly, salt and pepper, or like a pair of socks.
I'm just going to say it again. I still think we're Friday when you say that. And how he said black people never have two things to go together. Yeah, I definitely think of it as that, but I also think of it as a balance, or how we're kind of programmed to think of things in two, whether it's up and down, it's right or wrong, it's left or right, it's either or instead of a and, I guess. And so that's what I think of when I think of that particular definition of, or interpretation of by.
Yes, and we'll definitely get more into the podcast about exploring both sides of arguments and also the gray area as well.
See, I like the gray area. Instead of like the and, like, you know, it's either and or. I like the and part instead of the or part. But I know, I don't think a lot of people really think in terms of how two opposing things can blend and come together. But yeah, I would be interested to definitely explore that part of the conversation whenever an episode calls for it.
Moving on to the second definition of the word by, B-Y-E, which is short for goodbye. And also, I didn't even know this definition. By can also mean a round in a competition in which a team or player does not play a game or have a competitor. See, I don't watch sports, so I was not familiar with that. But, in terms of goodbye, I feel like a lot of the times when you are getting older and you are like transitioning into adulthood, that can mean saying goodbye to certain elements of your childhood, or that could mean saying goodbye to the person that you thought you were as you transition into the person that you actually are. I believe that that term of by really resonates to me right now. What about you, Kandi?
In terms of goodbye, I thought of it initially as something, are parts of us that we lose, in a sense, or that we say goodbye to. But a friend of mine made a point that it could also mean things that we let go of. So instead of seeing it as something that we lose, we can see it as something that we just have to let go of to make us a better person, or to make us, closer to our idea of a person, in a sense, and how we choose to let those things that are maybe toxic or bad for us leave our lives so that we can get closer to finding out who we are as people. And the second definition of that being a round in a competition in which a player doesn't play because they don't have a competitor, I didn't actually know that term either. I think I've heard it because I've played sports, but it never really registered until I actually looked up the definition. And I felt that one fit so perfectly because of the simple fact that when somebody is unchecked or they don't really have any opposing force against them, then I feel like their opinion or their ideas are kind of what people use to be like the norm, or to be like the blanket for what or who everybody else is supposed to be. Or their definition of something is the one that people are supposed to use to define themselves as a whole. And so I felt like that fit perfectly into the idea of what this podcast delves into as far as identity and the ways that we say bye to it.
Wow, that was very deep. I didn't think of it that way.
I mean, you know.
Like, man, you hitting that deep stuff. Like, and I definitely do agree that, if you are left unchecked or unchallenged, that it does kind of be, or the term by does become a way for you to kind of define like yourself and like your characteristics, your social norms. I think we'll definitely be talking about a lot of social norms in this podcast because it is not uncommon nowadays, especially with millennials and Gen Z, for us to go against the grain. And for a lot of us, it's just not as easy as following tradition. But then sometimes we don't like the new way of change either. And then we then have to figure out what way of living our lives really works best for
But it's like, do
ourselves.
you not like the new way of change because it's changed and you just don't want to change or adapt? Or is it because of who sets the standards for what that quote unquote new change is?
Well, to me, it depends on the situation. So I'm just going to give an example. So let's just say proposing. Like, normally it is tradition that the man proposed to the woman, which, that's never really bothered me. I think it's cool, but I think it's really, it kind of aggravates me when, like, a woman does it, a woman proposes to a man and like she is just like bashed, she's shamed, people say she's desperate. And like while I would never propose, to a man, I'm not going to bash somebody that does it either, you know? And there are like, plenty of couples who they didn't really have a formal proposal. The man and the woman, they just kind of, they were sitting, they were like, hey, so are we going to do this? Are we going to get married? And there was never any proposal. They kind of like, just kind of, they just went and got married. And when it really just comes down to it, like when you're asking somebody to marry you, why does it matter if like that's the man or the woman? You know what I mean? Like it's just that simple. Now, granted, I will say this. I feel like, and this is just my personal opinion, as a woman, if you have to ask him and he has never mentioned marriage to you, then you're better off just finding somebody else to marry you so that, it's not even a matter of if he's going to propose, it's when. So that's, just what I think. But yeah, so that's just kind of what I mean. Like I'm always very inquisitive, and I always look forward to what our generation and what the next generation has in store for pursuing change and making change. But at the same time, it's like I just want there to be like sound reasoning, and they're not just doing it to go against the grain. Like while I don't always agree with like traditional ways of thinking and traditional customs, like it or not, some of them do work. Some of them do make sense. I think it's just a lot of the time um, what's the word? Like sometimes how it's like enforced, sometimes it can be hard to
To actually kind
swallow.
of point to that whole proposing part, but we can get into that later. Let's take a quick break. All right, so we are back and ready to wrap up the rest of the show. So number 3 on our list is BY, which is identify the agent, performing, and action. So for me, this means basically the reason or the mean or the purpose that drives us individually that we use in terms of identifying ourselves. The first thing that came to mind whenever I read this definition was by faith. So it's a means or a way in which we do something. It's through faith. And there's other ways, of course, like religion, which is one that I just named. Who we are is like our innate personalities, our signs. And basically, I just see this one as how, why, and the what that drives us.
I think it's also important that we touch upon how what that drives us can change over time. So, say,
Definitely.
for example, what drives you could be like maybe your culture that you come from, and let's say you came from a very, we'll say, very traditional Southern Bible Belt type culture, and then maybe something happens to you. Maybe you go to jail. Maybe you get locked up, and that can change people. That can change how you see the world, how the world sees you, your identity. You come out a new person, and then maybe what drives you, could be, making sure everybody has a fair trial, and making sure that children don't get caught up in the system and whatnot. So I think it's important to note that what can drive you initially can become different than what drives you as you get older and you have new life experiences. I will say that when you're younger, I feel like a lot of the time what drives you can be like a little bit more selfish, as opposed to like when you get older and then it becomes about maybe doing what's best for your family, or maybe you want to pursue a career that impacts other people's lives.
So, in other words, your experience can also be a driving force as well.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, number 4, buy, B-U-Y, which means to acquire something in exchange for payment. And I think this definition plays into how we define our identity, because it basically goes into what we put value on. And being in such a materialistic world, a lot of the time we put value more so on things and on people, or even ourselves. And we define ourselves with what we have, how much of it we have, how much money we have, versus who we are.
Yes, I definitely do agree with what you say. And I think it's also important that we also dissect how not only that our values change over time, but how we place more value in certain things. So once again, and I think this once again can happen, as we get older, we might put value in more materialistic things, but then as we get older, we start to value more things like quality time, maybe spending time with our family, or maybe you want to go on a vacation as opposed to buying a very expensive Chanel bag.
Or PlayStation 5.
Or the PlayStation 5. Because that's going to be about, $600 when it comes out. But
I think it'll be closer to 4, actually. With just the trend of how they've been the past couple of years, I think it might be closer to 4.
I think it might be like 5. Gaming systems are expensive, man. Good grief.
Yeah, they're usually about 4-ish, but it might also depend on how much the Xbox is. Because, they gotta, keep that competition going, and yeah. But we'll see. Either way, I'm getting one.
I actually want to get a Switch, but that's besides the point.
I wanted one, but the only reason I would buy it is to play Zelda, which is the only reason I bought a Wii, was to play the Zelda that came out at the time. And so I guess in terms of value for me, it would be worth more to buy a PlayStation, because I would play more games on it, than to buy a Switch just for one game and then not touch it anymore.
No, that definitely makes sense. I forgot my whole point. But we just got so distracted. But definitely, like, as you get older, like how your value on certain things does change. And just seeing the word buy, like B-U-Y, I automatically think of like finances, how you manage your finances, how important it is to be financially educated, because especially like in the Black community, I feel like a lot of us don't have the head start that like other families have, in terms of knowing how to manage the stock market, knowing how to buy a rental property. And, if our parents don't have that knowledge, or if Black parents and grandparents don't have that knowledge, how can they pass it down to their children? And I think that's very
true.
That's a very good topic that we'll touch on in later podcasts, because financial education is honestly its power. Money rules the world. I know people don't like to think of it that way, but it's the truth. And, the quicker you learn how to manage your finances, in my opinion, the more successful you'll be in the long run.
True that. And last but not least, just to throw this in there, identity is defined as the fact of being who or what a person or thing is. So ultimately, who are you? And who do you, or what do you identify, and how do you identify yourself? Ooh, that was a tongue twister. Which are topics that we would definitely get into in later episodes. And we just look forward to basically sharing our experiences and just seeing where this whole thing goes. So I think that wraps it up. Unless you have anything else you want to add, Tahrea.
Oh, no, I'm just, really looking forward to this podcast, looking forward to more very, random banter as we try to figure out this whole thing called life, one misstep and one funny reference at a time. So, that wraps up our first episode. Please follow us on all our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter.
At By Identity Podcast are all the handles. And I think that's it. So, cool. Until next time, bye.
Bye.